All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can follow me on X at bdomenech. Follow the show at Big Ben Show Fox on X and on Instagram. We want to thank you for subscribing, and I hope that you'll share it with your friends, rate and review us if you like the show, especially. And I hope that you'll continue to have the kind of response and weigh-in that we've experienced on YouTube, Instagram, and across other platforms. Really appreciate the feedback for the show thus far. Today, I want to talk to you about a possibility going forward for Israel that I think we need to understand as being a very real development that has been percolating for a long time. What happens if you win a war but lose a generation in that process? This was a question that was put from Tony Ducapil of CBS to Benjamin Netanyahu himself in a recent interview.
There was a poll that came out recently in America finding that just 14% of Americans under 30 say their sympathies lie with Israel and with the Israeli people. You are losing young people across the political spectrum in America and across the world. Is there a fix for that?
I think so. I think the first fix is to finish the war as speedily as possible, something that I have sought to do against all this contrarian propaganda. Of course I want to end the war. Who wants it to continue? I've been to war myself. I've been in battles. My brother died leading the historic rescue at Entebbe for the release of hostages.
I'm aware.
You have to be crazy to want wars to prolong. So
ending
you
the
want
war.
to end them. You want to end the war speedily, because in the TikTok age and in the television age, letting wars go on too long is going to cost you precisely what it costs you. There's a real battle on the social media. It's a big battle. Not simple.
It is.
So it's a battle for truth, really.
It's a battle for truth, he says, but you can hear within that answer an implied acknowledgement that this is a battle that Israel is currently losing. And you see that consistently in the polls that we've had here over the course of the past several months. The Harvard-Harris poll found in September that roughly half of Generation Z respondents support Hamas over Israel. And yes, that's the explicit framing of it. More than a third of millennials shared their views. Gallup's July survey found support among those 18 to 34 for Israel's military actions in Gaza and Iran to be just 9% and 15%, respectively. A Quinnipiac survey showed strong majorities believing it's in America's interest to favor Israel back in December of 2023, 69% agreeing with that. But it's dropped all the way to 47% today, driven by a significant increase largely among young voters in that view. And then there was a major study released just in the past week by the Conservative Family Research Council. They have a survey of American Christians that they do every couple of years, and they found just 6 in 10 regular churchgoers believe it's important to pray for Israel, and a majority did not believe it was important for the United States or their churches to support Israel. Consistent with other polling, church-going Gen Z respondents ranked the lowest in support of any kind, verbal, financial, or even prayer. This is a dynamic that I think Israel doesn't really have an answer for, and I think that supporters of Israel in America seem to be ignoring in a way that I think is very damaging. We've seen in the past these areas that you have a presumption, perhaps based on generational views, that things are going to continue inevitably, that Christians will always be the kind of people who support Israel and support its right to defend itself. But the simple fact is that in the wake of everything that's gone on in the last 2 years, the opposition driven by social media against Israel is significantly emboldened. And one of the things that they're using is the conversation around Israel as being something that is shifted and is using some of the same tropes and weapons that the left has used in the past. Particularly the idea that people who are defenders of Israel are very quick to jump to the conclusion that any criticism of the nation state or their behavior or their military or their leadership is on its face anti-Semitic. That's something that I think a lot of people who've come up in Generation Z view as being, well, you just want to shut down what I have to say or my opinion because you're calling it racist. You think that I shouldn't be able to go after something like DEI, or the way that we see that affect higher ed, the advantages that have been doled out by certain policies. They were called racist for objecting to that. They were called racist for jokes and called bigoted and all these other things. And they see something similar happening in the conversation about Israel and believe it's of the same nature. There's also, I think, an increased wariness about having too close ties to a foreign nation that could drag the United States inevitably into conflicts. We saw that being stoked by many Israel critics who were, going after the idea of striking Iran because they claimed that it would lead us into World War III. Obviously, that didn't happen, though I don't see them being very willing to acknowledge that fact. Ultimately, I think here, Israel is going to have to figure out a way to make the case for itself and to find Americans who are going to make the case for it if it's going to turn things around. Within a generation of Americans who, while they do support Donald Trump, and while we've seen the shifts, particularly among male voters within that generation to the right, they don't necessarily agree with his policy, his very pro-Israel policy, or view that as being something that is part of an America First agenda. And no AIPAC campaign that's running ads to say that they are an America First organization is going to change that. There needs to be new messaging, there needs to be more leadership, and it needs to come from Americans who make the case for why we should have the kind of unique relationship with Israel that we do. Until that happens, we're going to see these trends continue. I'm Ben Domenech. You're listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. Happy to have you with us this week. Follow us on X and on Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. We'll be back with more right after this. And we're back on the Big Ben Show. Happy to be joined now by Lucas Tomlinson. You can follow him on X at Lucas Fox News. Lucas, I want to talk to you about a number of different things that are happening in the world today. And I think we should start with the situation coming out of the president's brokered agreement in Israel. One that obviously, has led to a lot of people, very happy about the release of the hostages and everything else. Tell me a little bit about what we know about how that deal came together.
Really came together because of President Trump's force of personality. Mm-hmm. Also, it was great to get his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, off the bench. Seems like whenever he's involved in the Middle East, great things happen. Mm-hmm. We saw that with the Abraham Accords in the first term, and now, once again, there he was. And Steve Witkoff, who it turns out perhaps having a business degree or being in business might be better than a degree in foreign policy or the Foreign Service.
These days, certainly.
We're certainly seeing that with President Trump. He's certainly making a case for that. But on a serious note, I was on the president's trip to the Middle East in May, and what I saw is a man very comfortable with those leaders in the Arab world, in the Middle East, and I think those interpersonal relationships helped. Certainly President Trump has a good relationship with President al-Sisi of Egypt. That is where the talks took place to help broker this deal. We saw buy-in from Qatar. You also saw President Trump take the Israeli prime minister essentially by the scruff. Mm-hmm. They demanded an apology. They did it right there in the Oval Office. There was the prime minister calling on the phone, to apologize for that strike targeting Hamas leaders in Qatar. Now, did that help bring this ceasefire and get the hostages released? Absolutely. Officials will tell you that. I think this whole deal went down because of the personalities involved, the relationships, and also getting both sides to compromise. If Prime Minister Netanyahu, he got what he wanted. He got the hostages back. All 20 of them is a huge win, not only for him, but also for President Trump. There were many doubters. For months, we've been hearing in the streets of world capitals, ceasefire now. You got the ceasefire. Mm-hmm. Israeli forces still occupy about half of Gaza, and that's a win for the prime minister. Getting the remains of the deceased hostages back is going to be challenging. Many are officials say are buried in unmarked graves. It's been 2 years since many have been killed, many probably under the rubble of buildings that have been destroyed by the Israeli forces and also booby-trapped by Hamas. In terms of the ceasefire, we've seen some retribution by Hamas, public executions in the streets. how quickly you can get an international force together to go into Gaza, that's going to be a big question, because while this is a big win for President Trump, certainly for Bibi, this next phase, how quickly can there be a stabilizing force in there? How are U.S. forces, while they're not going into Gaza, this command that's being stood up in Israel, money, rebuilding Gaza, also getting Hamas out of power? We haven't seen that yet.
Lucas, the situation in Israel is one that, obviously is not going to be resolved with this. The president, though, was sounding this pretty big note about, this is the day that things are going to change. And, to me, it seemed overly optimistic when it comes to your appreciation of what's going on regionally after this type of deal was brokered. Do you think that it's going to lead to certain things, certain opportunities opening up more for the United States? Is this kind of a proof that the relationship can be one where there's give and take and there's an understanding with this administration where we're going to see potentially more deals struck within the next 3 years?
Ben, I think you're right to be cautious. Remember, Gilad Shalit, a soldier in the Israeli forces, it took 5.5 years for him to be released from captivity in Gaza. That was back in 2011. It took 1,000 Palestinian prisoners being released to do it, including Yahya Sinwar, who was killed, of course, a year ago, the leader of Hamas. This deal was not without cost for the Israelis. It took 2,000 Palestinian prisoners to free the 20 being held hostage, those that were living. Among those were 250 Palestinians who were serving life sentences for killing Israeli citizens, killing Israeli soldiers. It's the fear that the next leader of Hamas could be among those returning to Gaza right now. So disarming Hamas, that's the next hurdle, and it's a big one, because right now there is no international force on the ground in Gaza. How quickly that comes together remains to be seen. So I think you have every right to be cautious. We're dealing with the Middle East here, and while it was incredible seeing those hostages freed, these videos on social media, on Fox, of course, of hostages being reunited with their families, it's incredible. The next step for Gaza remains to be seen, and certainly how long Israeli forces are going to stay, and if Hamas were to break this ceasefire, Israeli forces might have to go back in.
Are you surprised, you mentioned Kushner getting off the bench, that he weighed in such a significant way on this by all reports, given that he, prior to this administration coming in, basically had washed his hands of it and said, I did my political thing, now I'm doing all these business deals, and that kind of area of work. Was it basically just that he saw an opportunity to achieve something and that he was needed, or did you think that the president asked him specifically to do it?
I think there's no question the president asked him specifically to do it. He knows about the relationships he has in the region. President also, we've certainly seen in this administration, only his most trusted agents, in this case family members through marriage, that's who the president trusts. That's who he wants speaking on his behalf, whether it's Steve Witkoff, his special envoy, now with Jared Kushner. Look at his cabinet. Look who's around him. He only wants trusted agents speaking on his behalf, and that's what we saw here.
In a sit-down with Tony Dukabil at CBS, Bibi was asked about the situation in the West. And there's been enormous examples of polling that has shown the degradation of views of Israel, primarily among young people, but not just on the left, on the right as well, which is something that's mostly unprecedented in terms of the fall off. And there are different ways to ask the question, obviously, but it's definitely a trend. This is something that is also notable for having extended into the American Christian population, including church-going people and the like. There's data out in the last couple of weeks from some people who do that studying consistently that have shown, that you've got basically a drop-off of significance, 20 points plus, from about 2 years ago in the wake of October 7th, when everybody was all, pro-Israel. How sticky do you think that is? And do you think that this is something where it's going to require more of an Israeli push to try to win some of those people back, or will it perhaps naturally or organically change when you don't have the day-to-day push of images from Gaza that people see on their social media?
I think a lot depends on the situation on the ground and how do you square America first with helping Israel. President Trump campaigned not getting involved in foreign wars. He was almost echoing John Quincy Adams, do not go out in the world and seek of monsters to destroy. However, certainly there was a lot of sympathy toward Israel, but as you pointed out, certainly as the polling points out, there's been a drop-off in support for Israel because people are seeing what it takes to support Israel. It requires a lot of money, requires a lot of weapons. You know, what did you see Israel flying? You know, F-15s, F-35 Joint Strike Fighters. You know, these are essentially American weapons. Now, of course, the Israelis have their ingenuity. You don't kill a leader of Hamas in a guest house in Tehran necessarily with American backing. I think we can learn a lot from the Israelis when it comes to that sort of thing. But when you look at the killing of Hezbollah's leader Nasrallah in Beirut, you know, those were American bombs, American jets, piloted by Israeli pilots, no question. But I think there's a growing number of Americans who are a little uncomfortable with how close the relationship is because of how does that square with America first and putting U.S. interests first. But I think what President Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister have shown the world is these are natural allies and certainly a lot of shared values, Judeo-Christian values.
When you saw the backlash to the consideration of backing an attack on Iran, you know, part of that was a lot of fomenting of disaster and apocalypse, World War III, you know, that kind of thing. And the president chose at that moment to come out and basically say, I define what America first means. And I thought that was a very significant moment because it was basically saying, look, you know, whatever it meant before, I define it now. It's, you know, my policy is this. And so you guys got to get in line or shut up, basically.
We heard a lot of lawmakers saying this isn't MAGA, this isn't America first, right? And the president said, it's my call. Right
now, some of the people who are still in that category, and there's fewer of them who are at least saying it publicly, that number includes Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been getting strange new respect from all sorts of corners. Tim Dillon says that she's going to be the president of the United States. And it's one of these things where her criticism on this point in particular has been, you know, pretty loudly, increased and hailed by a number of the president's critics. Do you believe that faction is actually one that is politically significant? Meaning, sure, it's fine to see these things in numbers and poll numbers and that type of thing, but they don't necessarily lead to changes in policy. And you have to really see a sustained shift, I think, for those types of changes to take hold. Do you think this is a situation where people who care about Israel should be concerned that there is a shift going on within the Republican Party that could see it in a future non-Trump election really break away from what has been historically, you know, central to the voting base of its party for a long time?
When you look at some of the president's closest advisors, members of his cabinet, some of them served in the Iraq War, and many are bitter. You know, Tulsi Gabbard, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, JD Vance, the vice president. Many deployed, they signed up, they're patriotic, they were gung-ho. They returned to a different country. Their experiences certainly changed their thinking of world events, world views, and that is what led them to America first. And I think that kind of thinking, American isolationism, not going out in search of monsters to destroy, not going out trying to solve the world's problems. Something as basic as, should the United States be the world's policeman? I think the Republican Party is very split on that. You have, you know, traditionalists like Roger Wicker, Mitch McConnell, who think the United States should be the world's policeman. We keep the world safe. You know, the only thing more expensive than fighting a war is losing one. Do you want to see defense spending build up to 5% of GDP? You've heard President Trump go to NATO, go to Europe and say, you must spend over 5%. You saw the Secretary of War recently go to Brussels and demand, NATO spend more. However, the United States is only spending about 3% of our economy on defense. A lot of people want to see that a lot higher. Not to go on too much of a tangent here, but defense buildup. You know, the Wall Street Journal editorial page say the president has not rebuilt the military. The United States needs a lot more warships, only building 1.2. I don't know how you get a 0.2 on there for Virginia-class submarines. Should be building 2 a year to stand up to China and to world threats. In terms of going back to your question, it's a big faction of the Republican Party. It's why these people were elected. It's why they won their primaries. The Marjorie Taylor Greenes in Congress, extends to Tennessee as well. Tim Burchett, they said they can't find Ukraine on a map. Why are we supporting Ukraine? It's a very loud voice in the Republican Party.
The part of this that I think is still a dubious factor, though, is that when I look at the resistance to something like what the president's policy has been toward those cartel boats coming out of Venezuela and out of the kind of experience of the past, and saying that we need to ramp up when it comes to South America, the targeting of some of these fentanyl traffickers. That doesn't seem to be getting the kind of backlash that you might expect, even though Rand Paul is out there, saying that this is, unacceptable and that they, need to go through the process. If you were really seeing an America First faction that is kind of breaking away from the president and saying he's getting America First wrong, wouldn't you see more voices or hear more voices coming out and criticizing those types of moves?
There's no question. And you have not heard a lot of criticism, at least among the president's own party, the Republican Party. Why? How do you square, peace in the Middle East with what's going on in Venezuela? There's a lot going on in the world.
Yeah.
Government shutdown. But there's been at least 5 strikes on these drug boats. They've been carried out by Reaper drones. We haven't seen the evidence. The Pentagon has not held press conferences. They've not done the dog and pony show showing the evidence. They're happening with drone footage, kill TV, if you will, and then we move on. But there's a hell of an armada right now in the Caribbean. There's more forces in the Caribbean than any time since the invasion of Panama in 1989. It's big. There's multiple warships. You have a Marine Expeditionary Unit. You have an attack submarine. Okay. You have a squadron of 5th generation stealth fighter jets in Puerto Rico, at a base that was shuttered years ago. I've still wondered about that. How is this shuttered base now hosting all these jets?
I don't know.
It makes you wonder if it was ever closed. But now you have the president talking about the CIA getting involved in Venezuela. He's now ruling out strikes inland, inside Venezuela. That, I think, is the one issue that could potentially cause a split, because getting involved in foreign wars, that was not what the president, or starting them. Yeah. It was not part of his agenda going forward. So what happens in Venezuela? It's one thing to drone some drug boats offshore. There's plenty of people that have no problem, especially when you come from and are running against drugs. We never had 100,000 drug overdoses in this country until COVID. There's a lot of people want to see that go down, so why not attack the supply? It would be interesting if there's maybe more, not sound soft here, Ben, but a campaign of maybe, remember Nancy Reagan's Just Say No? I mean, people laugh, people mock it. It worked. People were cutting up oregano to get high in the 80s, the drought of 86. But this is something that could potentially, it's something to watch, because if this gets bigger and there's, people running around Venezuela with blue badges, maybe not, they don't bring them. There's going to be some questions being asked.
Talk to me about JD Vance's role in the context of this. You mentioned him obviously as someone who, is a veteran and who understands, the sphere of the global influence of the United States perhaps differently in terms of our priorities and in terms of where he's focused than some of the other folks who are within this large and sometimes messy coalition of the right. Do you believe that he is firmly on one side of this argument when it comes to foreign policy? Because I actually think, not that it's quite to the level of blind men and the elephant, but I actually think he's been a little cagier than people respect about where his views actually lie. There are always these people who are sort of saying, well, this guy is part of the Vance faction. But then when Vance talks about these things, he doesn't necessarily sound like those same people. What are your thoughts?
He's a smart man, the vice president. And I think he's taking notes. He's seeing what works and what doesn't. I think there's no question he wasn't the biggest supporter of the strikes in Iran. He also, now in hindsight, has been able to see the result. And when President Trump spoke to Knesset in Jerusalem and talked about those strikes making a big impact on the peace ceasefire, at least with Hamas. He's taking notes. He's a smart guy. No question, he's one of the president's biggest supporters. We've seen him on the Sunday talk shows. He's taking notes, and whatever beliefs he had, they're not immutable. He's seeing what works and what doesn't, and certainly we're seeing that in the Caribbean. We're seeing it in the Middle East, and he also understands that the United States being strong, tough, and resolute, and supporting allies. He's making note of that.
Mm-hmm. Let's quickly just talk a little bit about the latest when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. The president has said, in the aftermath of the Israel deal, well, let's have some more deals. Let's get these other, sort of wars ended.
Why not? Got momentum.
Yeah, exactly. Keep the momentum going. Talk to me about what the state of play is currently there and what this latest reporting around the idea of sending them Tomahawks potentially. What's the real deal there?
Here's a reality check on the Tomahawk cruise missile. These are fired, the vast majority of them, from United States guided missile cruisers and destroyers, from warships, and also submarines. We saw 30 Tomahawks launched against Iran's third nuclear facility in Natanz. 30 were launched from the USS Georgia guided missile submarine. They're very expensive. They're about $2 million a copy. Some of the more advanced versions, upwards of $4 million a copy. There's very few launchers to launch those things on land. I checked it out. The United States Army only has 2 of these Typhoon box launchers to launch the Tomahawk cruise missile from land. Why don't we have more of them? People might be asking and wondering. Well, that's because the INF treaty for decades that banned this type of weapon system, intermediate range missiles, could not be fired from land. From 1987 until Trump's first term, the United States did not make any launchers on land. So the United States, once it got out of them, has all of 2 batteries. 2. One has been deployed recently to Japan as a little show of force to the Chinese, concept, if you will. But the idea that Tomahawk cruise missiles are going to be sent to Ukraine, it sounds very similar to some of the other weapon systems that for months and months and months is something the Ukrainians want. They eventually get any kind of transfer of Tomahawks to Ukraine. It's far in the future and not very realistic. In fact, the Ukrainians seem to be doing pretty well with what they have in terms of the drones. We've seen the drone strikes targeting Russia's energy facilities. It was very interesting recently when the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, was in NATO. We heard something different. We heard about costs being imposed on Russia if they don't come to the table. So certainly the threat of Tomahawks is there, but just a little dose of reality. The Ukrainians do not have United States guided missile destroyers and cruisers, and to launch these things from land, you're talking about 2 batteries in the U.S. Army that can do it. Those aren't likely going to be deployed. And also just stockpile. The United States only has a couple thousand Tomahawks. If you're the Admiral Paparo, the head of the Indo-Pacific Command, you saw those Tomahawks being launched at the Houthis in Yemen, in Operation Rough Rider. There are more Tomahawk strikes in one day the United States makes in a year. Again, you don't want to give that up. Studies have shown that if the United States fought a war with China, we'd run out of precision-guided weapons like the Tomahawk in 2 to 3 weeks. You don't want to go full Winchester on the Tomahawk and then be able to deter enemies.
Last question, as long as I have you, Lucas. Taking stock of Washington and their season and how it's played out thus far, what are your thoughts and what's the big problem?
The big problem right now is our defense.
Yep, that is the correct answer.
And when the Bears scored that 55-yard touchdown, dump pass to Swift, and we saw a missed tackle by Quan Martin. That's actually not what bothered me the most. It was Lattimore kind of just jogging to the sideline.
Yep.
No gang tackling. Didn't even look like he was ready to make a play. Then he runs for a touchdown. Also, you can't lose the turnover battle. We had 3 turnovers, the Bears 0. Caleb Williams, DC guy coming back, Gonzaga High School, right down the street from where we're talking right now, Ben, for our listeners that don't know. Can't lose the turnover battle, but the defense is a bigger problem.
The defense is a big problem because they've had the same thing happen now on multiple drives where the opposing team has a third down with about single digits, 2 to 5 yards, something in that range. They had it happen in the Falcons game. They had it happen in the Bears game. Joe Witt's defense plays this soft coverage that lets people get to the sticks. And you actually can see on the screen captures, and it's a little unfair because obviously the players are moving, but you see multiple players open, able to make a first down or already standing in a place to make a first down. And this defense just does not seem to be playing with the kind of aggression that they ought to. The other thing is, Bobby Wagner is one of the leading tacklers in the NFL. Great. He's great at tackling. He is not good at coverage. Do not put him out in coverage. He is not fast enough.
Not
to
the
do
youngest
that anymore.
linebacker.
Exactly.
In National Football League.
No. And so I'm very frustrated with it because, especially with a defensive head coach, you would think that this would be more of a priority. But I think that they're, as long as they have that problem, the NFC East is a very competitive division this year. It is not
we thought we were going to be in first place after Monday night.
No, this is nothing like the Steelers. God bless them. Great fortune for them. But it's one of these things where I just think that if they don't stand up and fix that problem by the middle of the season, then they're not going to be doing anything in terms of where they go from here.
What you can untie, you must cut.
Exactly. Lucas Tomlinson is on X at Lucas Fox News. Thanks so much for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show today.
Ben, always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we're back on the Big Ben Show. I'm happy to be joined today by Katie Herzog. Her new book is Drink Your Way Sober, the Science-Based Method to Break Free from Alcohol. You can find it wherever books are sold. You can also follow her on X at Katie Herzog. She is the host of one of my favorite podcasts, Blocked and Reported. I strongly encourage you to subscribe to their Substack and get their primo episodes. And yes, you do have to put up with Jesse Singal in order to listen to it, but trust me, it's worth it. Katie, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. This is obviously a very personal book, and I really enjoyed reading it, which I have to say, given the subject matter, I was not actually expecting. I thought that it would be perhaps a rough go. What was the point where you decided this was an experience, a story that you felt comfortable sharing with such a wide audience?
I'm not sure I am comfortable sharing it with a wide audience, to be honest with you. But I think that I just came to a point where I realized that I was sort of gatekeeping something that I thought could save people's lives. And that might sound hubristic. I completely understand this, but I felt like I had found something that had done a lot of good for me, and that by not being willing to sort of share this with the public, that I was doing something sort of irresponsible. But I didn't really want to write this book. I don't love talking about it, to be honest with you. It's like there is some deeply personal stuff in there, some embarrassing stuff. Not the most embarrassing stuff. The most embarrassing stuff I left out of the book, to be clear. There is worse things. But I felt like I had a responsibility to sort of come public with my story because I thought that my story could help other people.
Mm-hmm. You have in the book, for something that was left in, I once drank 3 Four Locos, broke into a construction site, climbed up a crane, and then walked out onto the limb. Sure, I could have died or been arrested, but it made for a great story. I have to say, your escapades are actually, I found them pretty entertaining for the most part.
Yeah, that one wasn't embarrassing. That was just fun. That was cool.
That's actually kind of awesome. I mean, if that was a guy, it would just be like a dude's rock moment. But anyway, I want to start by saying this, and it's something that I think people have experienced in their own lives just because I've heard it so much from so many people. In recent years, during the pandemic in particular, people experienced a dramatic increase in their personal drinking, and led them often to points where they made bad decisions, bad life choices, and engaged in behavior that really prior to the pandemic, I feel like they wouldn't have. Even, especially I would say there's a number of people I know personally who went from basically being social drinkers to being people who drank at home and by themselves, and that caused significant problems. I think your book is really well timed because it's coming at a point where a lot of them are kind of trying to take stock and trying to find ways out of that if it's stuck with them over the past couple of years. Tell me a little bit about the differences in approaches that you outline in this book, and why the one that you ultimately ended up being able to use is so different and perhaps not the kind of thing that the medical establishment necessarily goes to or even approves of.
Yeah, so the backstory is that I first started trying to get sober many years ago, like 15 years ago. And I did all the sort of regular, like the usual programs. I went to AA, I went to therapy, I did some outpatient group therapy sessions, like through public health agencies. I went to my doctor, and I was never told that there was a potential medication to my problem. And then during the pandemic, I started taking a drug called naltrexone. Naltrexone is an opioid blocker, an opioid antagonist, and it's been around for a really long time. It was first synthesized in the 1960s. It's been FDA approved for treating alcohol use disorder for over 30 years at this point. And I had never been told about this from any medical professional or therapist that I saw it over 15 years of various treatments. I read about this in an article in The Atlantic, and there are various different ways for taking naltrexone. Some people take it every day. There's a shot, a long-acting form called Vivitrol. But what I did was this very specific targeted protocol. It's called the Sinclair Method. And the Sinclair Method, what's so different about it is that it doesn't require abstinence. It actually requires drinking. So the protocol is very simple. You take the pill, you wait an hour or between an hour and 90 minutes, and then you drink basically as normal. And it blocks the pleasurable effects of alcohol. And this doesn't work for everybody. And everybody doesn't experience alcohol the same ways. But when I drink alcohol, or when I drank alcohol, I would get a euphoric effect. So for me, alcohol was a very energizing drug. It was almost like having a little bit of caffeine. It didn't sedate me. It didn't like calm me down. It made me high, not high like being stoned, but sort of up. And naltrexone blocks that. And so the Sinclair Method is, you just take the pill, you wait an hour, you drink, and you do this every time that you drink. And over time, your brain essentially gets rewired. You stop expecting the pleasurable response to alcohol, and you stop enjoying it, and you stop craving it. And that's exactly what happened for me. So I did this for 7 months. And then after 7 months of tracking my drinking and religiously taking the drug and increasing sort of alcohol-free days, that's one key component of this protocol, is that you only take it you only take it in anticipation of drinking. You do not take it when you're not drinking. I started increasing the number of alcohol-free days that I had. So I would do other things on those days that brought me pleasure to try to increase my natural endorphins in my brain. And after 7 months, I took a month off of drinking, and I just never started again. And that was 3 years ago. And I haven't had a drink since. And the really remarkable thing is that I haven't desired alcohol since. I don't crave it. I don't want it. I don't even think about it. And that was the thing that really was the struggle for me. The barrier when it came to these abstinence-only methods that I tried over years was that those methods, including AA, never extinguished the desire to drink. And so I was in this, there are great things about AA. I really don't knock AA. It saves a lot of lives, but an AA can give you tools to handle things like physical cravings and desire, but it doesn't eliminate the desire itself. And naltrexone, using the Sinclair Method, did that for me. And because it eliminated the barrier of abstinence, I think this could be a solution to a lot of people who know they want to control their drinking, but just cannot sort of bear the thought of never having a drink again. And, I used it to get sober, thus the title of the book, Drink Your Way Sober, but other people use it just to control their drinking. So they might want to drink one glass of wine at a dinner party and not the whole bottle, and naltrexone can be helpful for that as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that is true about living in a city or near a city, but like DC, is that drinking here is ubiquitous to the professional work life. Yeah. There are happy hours that I've been invited to that are on Tuesdays, mm-hmm. and it's just kind of ever present. And certainly when I was younger, I knew and was to some extent part of, I don't really enjoy happy hours, but to some extent I was part of that circle of people who would regularly network and interact and do all these things. And you would basically, treat what for, I think culturally used to be kind of a Friday night, atmosphere as something that was happening every day.
Yeah.
As much as that was sort of ubiquitous to everybody's experience here, it's also something that I think some people age out of For me, that's literally not something I can do. Having kids completely eliminated that. I go to probably one happy hour a month, and if that. But some people don't. And the difference in paths for those two things is dramatic and
Totally.
makes a big difference, I think. For the people who have been in that kind of pathway of life where it's like, this comes with the professional territory that I'm in. It will be weird for me to extract myself from those situations, or I won't be able to survive. This is literally something that I've been told by people. I couldn't have the career I had if I decided to stop drinking tomorrow.
Yeah.
What is your advice after your experience to them about just the ability to make that decision and being able to make it with this type of approach?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the beautiful thing about this approach is that you can still do the happy hours and you can drink, right? So you don't have to go to happy hour and sort of white knuckle your way through it and make other people uncomfortable because you're not drinking, which is silly, but it is something that happens.
No, it's totally true. You don't want to be the sad sack,
Right. Although, sobriety is increasingly more tolerated in society now, which I think is really a good thing. But you can, if I were going to a happy hour today, I would go to a happy hour. I wouldn't drink, but I would, get a soda water with some lime in it. Make people think I'm having a cocktail or something. But you can still do that with naltrexone, and I would never give any people medical advice because I'm not a doctor and I don't want to get sued. But in that situation, it is possible to take the drug and then go to the happy hour and continue to drink, have a good time. Less of a good time than you would if you were still boozing. That is true. It does cut the pleasurable response, but it allows you to continue the social behaviors, the ritual. It allows you to be among your friends and your peers and network, continue to drink, just not go overboard. So I think in that way, it can be really a benefit because you can go to the happy hour, you're probably less likely to make a fool of yourself at the end of the night. And, what you said about aging out of it is a really good point. Most people age out of problem drinking. Most people who, were binge drinkers in college do not continue to aren't going to keg parties when they're 40, aren't doing keg stands. It's incredible. It's called natural recovery. And that describes people who just sort of naturally age out of problematic drinking. They don't have to do anything specific to make themselves stop. The problem is the rest of us who didn't age out of it, including myself.
The prospects, I make breakfast every morning for my kids, and the prospects of having to do that while hungover are frightening enough. So that's what helps me. But one of the things that I think
it's a good motivator.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is true about the trend lines that we're seeing here that you mentioned is that abstinence generally, or being kind of someone who goes in that other direction, is clearly something that's taking on increased appeal among younger generations. I'm curious as to why you think that is. I have my own thoughts on that too, but you see it in so many different areas, and it's obviously something that is measurable in terms of the polling and statistics that we see about people who are drinking less. Maybe they're doing other things instead, but it's one of these things where there's definitely a trend line in that direction. What do you think are the major drivers for it?
The phones. I think it's the phones. And drinking less is generally a good thing. It's better for health. It's, the better for the criminal justice system, for the healthcare system. At a societal level, it is generally better. The problem, I think, is that young people are also not going out. They're not being social. They're not dating. They're not having sex. They're just not doing these other things that really are, developmental markers for entering into adulthood, because they are sitting at home on TikTok. That's sort of what I think about it. Maybe there's also maybe I'm being too pessimistic about it. Maybe it's also like an increase in maximizing culture. They're all trying to get fit and take care of their bodies. That might also be a part of it. But I think a big part of it is just that they're on their phones.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things that I see going on there is that there's, I think, a lot of people who have, because of this shift, led to innovations within the marketplace. Namely that I have never been surrounded by as many options. I'm not a big beer drinker, and so the fact that there's just so many, and NA options when it comes to beer available now all over,
And they're
the
actually
place.
good.
But like, it's one thing to have that be true in like Northern Virginia, but when I go to like the Outer Banks, Party Central or something like that, they're everywhere. There's a whole block of them, in the major, grocery stores and stuff. And that to me is kind of a signal that they wouldn't be putting this out there if people aren't buying it. And I think that there's just a general awareness that people have now that this is not the way that they want to go. Do you think that there's a generational thing going on there too, in addition to the phones, that maybe there was just so much of a kind of boozy attitude among people who were a little bit older than some of these folks that they're changing their ways, or is that something that is imaginary? I'm not sure.
I don't know. I mean, I don't spend too much time with young people, so I can't really comment from personal experience. But yeah, I mean, that might be part of it.
From Taylor Lorenz, she'll tell us.
Yeah. You see your cringe parents and their cringe friends getting drunk, and you want no part of it. The rebellion is to be healthy.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to say. Is this the rebellion against the wine mom? Have we basically said we don't want to be that? When we get a little bit older, and
you don't want the live, laugh, love sign in your kitchen when you're 21.
Yes, exactly.
And I think bar culture has also changed too. And I'm speculating here because I haven't been to a bar in a long time, and I don't know any young people. But a lot of the bars that I went to, when I was coming of age, they don't exist anymore. And maybe that's part of it as well. There aren't cool little dives for people to go to.
They don't have a sense of community. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of fancy and that's like well reviewed, and I'm sure that you can get all sorts of fancy cocktails there that will taste great. But I think that some of that community is definitely going away, and with it, that's the place where you're going there and you're drinking the cheap beer because you want to see the people who are at the bar with you and chat with them and complain about this local sports franchise. Yeah,
I mean, it also maybe the economy has something to do with it. I mean, so the bars that my favorite bars in the world, a PBR in 2007 was $1.50. You paid $2. The bartender got 50 cents, and that was fine. I don't think you can find many bars in America any now where you can get a beer for $1.50.
Yeah. The Sinclair Method is obviously one that has critics, and those include a lot of people who swear by either other methods or are real apostles for AA. And again, I share your view. I don't want to badmouth AA. I think it's been a huge help for many people who I've known who've gone through their own journeys on this. What are some of the main criticisms of this method?
Yeah, so one that I hear a lot is that people think that alcoholism, or alcohol use disorder as it's commonly called now, is a spiritual problem. And there's this idea that you can't cure a spiritual problem with a medical solution, with a pill. And I think the idea is that all problem drinkers have something inside of them, some hole inside of them that needs filled, and that you can't get there with a pill. And I think that is a simplistic way of looking at addiction. Some people do have a spiritual hole, or they have trauma, or they have some underlying issue that caused their drinking. But that's not the story for everyone. I don't think that's the story for me. I think that I developed an alcohol addiction because I started drinking really young, and I did it a lot. It was a learned behavior, an unfortunate one, but a learned behavior. I drank so much that I drank myself into addiction. And what I find interesting is that you never hear people say, like, we all know that the most deadly addiction that most people, that like in America is nicotine, right? Is tobacco. Tobacco kills more people worldwide than any other substance. Nobody assumes that smokers have a spiritual hole, that their addiction is a result of some deep-seated trauma or some underlying problem that makes them smoke. We acknowledge that nicotine is a highly addictive substance, and that's why people get addicted to it. But with drinking, people think that there's something else going on to sort of explain it, and I just don't think that's true for everyone. I don't think that's true for me. But that that's a tough lift for people, because I think that thinking is so pervasive. It's not the addiction itself that's the problem. It's, you got to get to the root of the problem before you solve the addiction. And I think that, for even for people for whom that is true, it's a lot easier to take care of your spiritual needs or your physical needs or your financial needs if you don't have the burden of addiction on your back. So I think even for people who have that experience, something like naltrexone that eliminates the physical desire to drink can be helpful. And again, I don't knock AA. I know that AA has saved millions of lives, and it is a program that gives addicts support, structure, a place to go, accountability. All of that is really important, but it's just not the only way. And as a culture, I think that AA has become so dominant that a lot of us assume, a lot of people who know that they have a drinking problem assume that there's only way out of that problem, and that way is to quit entirely. And this is a big world with a lot of different people in it, and there's not going to be one right solution for everyone. Naltrexone won't work for everyone, but abstinence doesn't work for everyone as well. And which is ironically something that Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, he acknowledged in his book, The Big Book. This is sort of the Bible of AA. There's a sentence in there, we don't have a monopoly on therapy. He acknowledged that. But sort of, over the last almost, 90 years of AA's existence, it's just become so dominant that people sort of assume that like it's AA or no way. And it's just not true.
Talk to me a little bit about the financial side, and I'm glad that you got into this in the book, of treatment for this. People I think who may not have had to run into experiences in their lives with people having to go to rehab and go through different therapies and the like may not be as familiar with the just sheer level of the costs involved and what actually trying to, even people who truly want to try to get better, what they face in terms of just the sheer burden of it on them and their families.
Yeah, it really depends on how you try to get sober. So AA is free. That's one of the brilliant things about it, is that there are AA meetings in every town in this country almost, and it's free. That's amazing. The rehab is not free. Rehab can be very expensive. Rehab on a lower end, you're probably talking $5,000 a month. On the upper end, many, many tens of $1,000s for the AA, for the rehab that I would personally want to go to. The one on a cliff in Malibu, and a lot
John
of those
Mulaney
programs.
Petting a horse, yes.
Yes, that's what I want. And a lot of those programs are AA based. So they're taking a free program and they're putting it in these very expensive facilities and giving you oftentimes not that much treatment. And in the nice ones, I'm sure there are various other extraneous therapies, petting horses, things like that, good food, private chefs, yoga, all of that stuff. But a lot of times the basis is really, it's AA, which again, free outside of those facilities. Naltrexone is a generic drug. So the patent expired in the 1990s. So there's also, I think this is one of the reasons more people haven't heard about it, is that there's very little financial incentive for drug manufacturers to market naltrexone, because they could just be undercut by the drug manufacturer down the street. So it's sort of the reverse of the financial incentive. That is changing right now. So there's a company called Or Health, which I don't have any financial ties to. I like them, but I'm not a client. I've never worked with them. But they do telemedicine. So this is one, and there are a bunch of companies that do this for the Sinclair Method in particular, or naltrexone. This is one of the great things that came out of COVID, was that you don't have to, if you have a medical problem, you don't necessarily have to see your family doctor, which when it comes to addiction, a lot of people don't want to do out of embarrassment, or they don't want to talk to their doctor about it. So you can go to these services that, you have a Zoom appointment or whatever, they send you the medication. So there's a bunch of different ones. But Or Health, they just developed a new drug that is a fast-acting form of naltrexone, and it's a mint. It's called Clutch. And I think this is really exciting. I've never taken it myself. They're marketing it as a way to sort of cut down on the side effects, because some people do have side effects from naltrexone. And you can also you don't have to take it and wait an hour. You can take it and drink more quickly, which I think could be a total game changer. So I think that's sort of a story of, a free market story. They've got there's this generic drug that nobody's making much money on, and they're finding ways to make it more expensive. They're innovating, which I think is great. I'm pro free market. I'm a capitalist, so good for them.
So I think that's I think that this is all something that people who have struggled with this type of thing should be looking into. What I would ask you about coming out of this book, though, is you mentioned the embarrassment of talking to your family physician. How do you talk about it to other people? Because that is something that you will, I think, at some point, inevitably have to do, either with your spouse, your partner, a friend, even, one thing, again, I talked about the reasons that people don't get out of this in the kind of DC professional circuit. One of them quite simply is, I just don't want to have a conversation with my friends about this, and because I don't know how it's going to go. So how do you recommend approaching that?
So I'm like the worst person to ask because I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell my spouse that I was doing this. I was like, I did this like fully in the closet, which is pretty common. I have interviewed a lot of people, and I know a lot of people through Sinclair Method communities who have done exactly the same thing because they don't want their spouse to know that they feel like they have a problem, or because their spouse has a problem, and there's like, it'll be a battle. Because sometimes you have these relationships that are sort of based on booze. One person wants to quit or reduce and the other doesn't, and is resentful about that. So that's an issue. And I also realized this after the book came out. I'm like, dang, this book is really, I don't know if this is a book that people are going to read in public. Like, it's a big red book that says drink your way sober.
I'll admit, I did the daring thing because, and this is typical for me, which is that I took this to my local and was reading it in my local. So,
great. Thank you, Ben.
But that's also when I read it. So anyway.
It's also available on Kindle if people don't want to show off on this way that you might have a drinking problem. The stigma about alcoholism is so much less than it was even when I started trying to quit 15 years ago. We all know addicts. We all like famed addicts, and we all know addicts in our lives. And I think the more people are willing to talk about that, the better it will be for the culture, because then other people can share their own experiences. I think just coming at it from a place of humility and also non-judgment. One of the things about being a heavy drinker, from my own experience, when I was in my heaviest drinking years and people around me quit, I was really very resentful of that. It felt like a betrayal. That is ridiculous thinking. I realize that now, but I think it's pretty common because it's holding a mirror up to your own drinking. And if this person can quit or reduce, why can't I? And I think problem drinkers are sort of defensive about that. Mm-hmm. But I think just, not assuming that you're alone, because you're probably not. And that's one of the brilliant things about AA, is that you really see the whole breadth of society in those rooms. 100%. And you see that addiction is not something that just affects sort of the down and out people on the street. It's not just winos on, living under bridges, drinking out of paper bags. It's successful people. It's even attractive people. And I think that's good. The more we realize that addiction, that it affects every facet of society except maybe Mormons. They might be the only group. Maybe Muslims too, at least the observant ones. Then I think the more other people can find that they can seek help.
Well, the book "Drink Your Way Sober: The Science-Based Method to Break Free from Alcohol" is a very interesting and enlightening read. It gets into the history of alcoholism and the history of all this different research, and the fact that you have a personal element to this story, I think, really makes it a powerful read. So, thank you, Katie, for having the courage to write it, even if you didn't want to.
Thank you, Ben. Good to see you.
You can follow Katie Herzog on X at Kitty Herzog and subscribe to her podcast, Blocked and Reported, and look for Drink Your Way Sober anywhere books are sold. We'll be back with more of The Big Ben Show right after this. All right, folks. So in the latest edition of The Spectator, we have a piece by Freddie Gray, my colleague there, about the likelihood of JD Vance being the nominee of the Republican Party in 2028, which is obviously something of much discussion about the future of the party, what the GOP is going to look like, why he potentially makes sense as being the heir apparent, and if there's anybody else who could potentially contend for that role. In the context of that discussion, you have to understand every different piece of media coverage that happens around JD Vance is in anticipation that he is going to be the likely next choice for the Republican Party, which is one of the reasons why I think you see the severe level of hate for him from all the normal figures who weigh in on this type of thing. Everybody from, the Jimmy Kimmels of the world to MSNBC, they all just hate JD Vance so much more than you might expect for a vice president. I mean, can anybody imagine the last time that a vice president got this level of attention this early within a term? It's pretty amazing when you actually follow it all. Most recently, when he was responding to a ginned up controversy about Republicans texting back and forth, this was what one MSNBC podcast guest had to say.
Well, here's two things about JD Vance. Number one, he used to say Trump is America's Hitler.
Right.
So he has regressed. And then number two, he is married to a woman of Indian descent.
Yes.
He has mixed race children.
Does.
So to all of the MAGA voters out there, if this man will not defend his wife and will not defend his kids, do you think he gives a crap about you or anything to do with you? What I see with JD Vance and all of the people around Trump is the minute they capitulate to him, they give it just an inch, they completely morally collapse. Everybody that comes into his orbit becomes a worse person.
The thing about this is a podcaster, by the way, who's been promoting herself across media as being an answer to what's wrong with the middle of the country. She's based in Oklahoma and does some, judgy white women podcast that, I'm just not even going to send you to because it will just make you dumber. But the thing that I find interesting about this is that she's saying a part of this that I think hasn't been publicly said as clearly before, which is that the reason that so many people on the left hate JD Vance as much as they do is that they wanted him to be a different guy. They wanted him to be on their side. They want him to have that type of approach that is basically a human avatar of the what's the matter with Kansas argument that basically comes from the middle of America and can critique it and judge it and call it out as racist and backwards and bigoted and all the other things that they would like JD Vance to be saying. And he even has, the resume and the lifestyle that they would definitely like to have within somebody who's one of their party leaders, a mixed race family and, a Silicon Valley connection, Ivy League pedigree. He's even got the military experience and he wrote a New York Times bestseller. He was speaking to the Aspen Institute and to the Ideas Festival and was on the stages at all these different things, in the lead up to 2016 and during it because of a memoir that people were citing as explaining the Trump phenomenon. And whatever you think of JD Vance's shift since then, he's clearly acknowledged that he held different opinions about Donald Trump early on, and then he came around to him. And for the left, that is the greatest sin. It's to be convinced that you were wrong about Donald Trump and that actually he's turned out to be much better for the country and for the people that you came from than you expected. From my perspective, this is going to be something that you're going to continue to see about JD Vance, continue to see about his family, continue to see in heightened personal attacks all the way through in 2028 until 2029, when these same people will be looking back with strange new respect. Say what you will about Donald J. Trump, but he's not as bad as JD Vance. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. You can follow us on X and Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. Put in a comment about what you think is going to happen in 2028. And if you think that anybody else other than JD Vance actually has a shot at running the GOP and running for president, then there are some other names in the mix, but he certainly has to be considered the favorite at this point. I'm Ben Domenech. We'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.